Welcome back. Up next is a panel featuring 3 fearless journalists who are exposing stories the mainstream media will not touch. You will not be disappointed by this crew and the crazy stories they have to share. Luke Rosiak is the Daily Wire's government efficiency reporter. He broke the Loudoun County transgender cover-up story, which helped win Governor Glenn Youngkin election in Virginia. He is the author of 2 investigative books and is known for using data to uncover government corruption. Spencer Lindquist is an investigative reporter at the Daily Wire, covering immigration, the diversity agenda, and federal overreach. He's broken major stories from the southern border and is a graduate of Pepperdine University and an alumnus of YAF's National Journalism Center. Moderating today's panel is Jeffrey Ingersoll, YAF's National Journalism Center Director and former Editor-in-Chief of the Daily Caller. A Marine Corps veteran and NYU grad, Jeff has reported from Iraq, Afghanistan, and beyond. Please join me in welcoming Luke Rosiak, Spencer Lindquist, and Jeff Ingersoll.
Welcome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for sitting with me. So, you guys are investigative reporters. I've recently taken an interest in a particular caper. I'm wondering if you could give me the inside scoop on it. Here we go. What happened to Jeff Epstein? In all seriousness, before we get to the actual reporting, Luke, you're a very tech-savvy individual. Certainly you could make more money elsewhere. What got you into investigative journalism? Tell the story of your start.
I think being a troublemaker, it's fun. You can get in a lot more trouble as a journalist than you can working in Silicon Valley. You could probably make more money in Silicon Valley, but you can have more of an impact, I think, as a journalist. I think part of it is temperamental. There's an element of, it's almost temperament has more to do than skill with some of this work as an investigative reporter. You have to be the kind of person that's willing to confront people and put yourself in awkward situations, and not everybody wants to do that.
Like what kind of situations? Give me some examples.
I had a boss that said years back, if I'm not getting at least 2 complaints about you per week, then you're not working hard enough. So, there would be people who would call and say, Luke showed up at my house at 8 p.m. That's my house where I live with my children. And I'd be like, yeah, dude, you were dodging me at the office, so of course I showed up at your front door.
Spencer, you kind of defied the odds. As a Daily Caller editor-in-chief, I constantly get these kids who want to be investigative reporters, and I'm always thinking, that takes time, it takes work. But you kind of defied the odds. You defied the conventional wisdom that it takes years to get into this work. How did you get into it at such a young age?
I was always passionate about politics and culture, and I grew up in San Jose. It's the middle of the Silicon Valley in California, of course, a notoriously liberal area. And I started a YouTube channel with my best friend growing up. We'd go to protests, we'd go to gun control rallies, pride parades, immigration-related events, really everything. And we'd go just pound the pavement and talk to people, get into debates. And that was kind of our form of being rebellious youth in that area. And really, my career got sparked by NJC, the National Journalism Center with YAF. I showed them my YouTube channel, and they said that, this is somebody that we want to bring on for this internship.
And how old were you at that point?
At that point, I was 21. I just turned 21.
So still in school.
Still in school,
yeah.
Exactly. And I didn't study journalism in college. It was just something that I learned through YAF and through the NJC, and it's something that I've loved ever since.
And you landed at Daily Wire first thing?
I was with The Federalist, being a contributor for a while and an intern. And I worked with Breitbart for a year, and I've been with Daily Wire for just over 2 years now.
Good for you. Let's kick it. Let's get to the investigation. So, Luke, you ended up basically tilting an election in Virginia with some deranged conduct that you covered. Tell me how you found the story, how you delivered it, and what the fallout looked like.
Sure. So in 2021, when school board craziness was starting to become a big thing and transgenderism was trying to infiltrate all the schools, the school system out where I live, Loudoun County, Virginia, was trying to pass this transgender policy. And at a school board meeting, they were going to debate it. And a lot of parents signed up to speak about concerns that their daughters could be harmed if the transgenders were allowed to go in the bathroom. And the superintendent started lecturing all the parents and said, there's no such thing as a transgender predator. Nobody has ever been hurt in our bathroom, so you guys are crazy. And ultimately, one of the parents who was angry about the situation was arrested and carried out by police who were basically beating him up, and they kind of like pulled his pants down and made a whole scene of it. And so this guy was, I actually learned about it from this guy being plastered all over the leftist media. He was on the front pages of newspapers, he was on CNN. Everybody used this guy as an example of, oh, see how people on the right and parents are becoming like domestic terrorists and bigots, and they're like starting chaos at school board meetings. And so this part, I think, is important. What I did to create this big story started with something super easy, super obvious. It was just about doing the work, putting the work in. And I called this guy and I said, why were you mad? And it's crazy when you think about that. This guy was viral for like a week. He was briefly famous on the left for being like this horrible terrorist, white blue collar guy that's like, probably violent, wants to overthrow the government. Nobody asked him why he was mad. And when
Who would have thought contacting the guy at the center of the story? How did you get his phone number? How did you find his phone number?
We have LexisNexis. We have tools like that can help look people up. So I called him, and he told me the story. And the reason that he was so concerned about the school system passing this transgender policy was because his daughter had been raped in the school bathroom, a ninth grade girl, in the school bathroom by a boy wearing a skirt 2 weeks prior to this meeting. And at the school board meeting, the superintendent lied about it and said, there has never been any rapes. If you're concerned about rapes, you're a bigot. And it turns out that the superintendent knew about this rape. He was concerned from the first day that it would pose an impediment to passing this transgender policy, and they lied about it repeatedly on government documents and elsewhere to conceal it. And so I worked with this father, and there's another lesson in here, I think, about patience. So first of all, the father was arrested for disorderly conduct. And Loudoun County had a George Soros-funded prosecutor who won by 1%, 51% of the vote with the help of almost $1 million from George Soros. And she never prosecuted minor crimes. That was her whole thing. She won't prosecute things like disorderly conduct. Well, when it comes to the father who's concerned about his daughter being raped by a transgender, she not only prosecuted for disorderly conduct, she sought jail time, and the prosecutor showed up personally. She didn't have one of her minions. The top elected prosecutor had to put this guy in jail.
Right.
Meanwhile, the rapist was basically booked and then released from jail. He's out loose, in society. And so the school system had never told anyone about this rape. They had arrested the father, and the father's telling me this, but he's told by the prosecutor, I'm not supposed to tell anyone. The prosecutor told me it's going to disrupt the prosecution of this rapist if you tell the public. And so he didn't want to go forward. And there's another lesson in here, which is being, not only being patient, but building people's trust. And you do that not by being sketchy. I don't do like undercover deception, that kind of thing. I find it's best to be straight with people. Just be a straight shooter, be reliable, earn their trust. And so for 6 months, I don't know how many it was, several months, I was working with this guy, and I kind of knew the whole story, but I didn't print it.
So I'm wondering, before you launched the story, you and I worked together in the past 10 years ago at the Daily Caller, and there were times where we knew it was going to be a nuclear bomb. Like, we knew it. So did you know that it was just going to blow up like crazy, or were you not expecting the reaction?
I didn't know it was going to be this big. This is a story that it's like the butterfly effect, where one thing leads to another, which leads to another. I mean, the echoes of it were enormous. And so we were going to wait until the guy was convicted, but we didn't. Unfortunately, what happened is this boy he sexually assaulted another girl. And so the school system had passed this transgender policy by concealing what had happened the first time, let the rapist stay in school, and he sexually assaulted another girl. And so at that point, we said, boom, we can't wait any longer. We were told by the prosecutor to wait. It's the proper thing to do. Yeah. We can't trust the system. So we went out in October, which happened to be right before the election, and immediately saw the polls just invert. And instead of Terry McAuliffe being the governor of Virginia, it was going to be Glenn Youngkin.
Yeah. And we know that there were other issues involved as well, but did Youngkin's office ever reach out to you guys at all?
Well, I think what matters is policy. I mean, they did a lot of things they basically made their whole campaign, a big portion of their campaign about the Loudoun rape. He did rallies in Loudoun, and he promised to impanel a special grand jury, which he did. And the grand jury, once Glenn Youngkin took office, indicted the school spokesman who had lied, indicted the superintendent who was also fired.
And what happened to them ultimately? Because all politics is local, and so, yeah, you had an effect on the state, but what happened locally?
Yeah, so with the indictments are kind of a strange story. One of them was acquitted of a felony. The other was convicted, but then it was overturned on a technicality, and then they decided to not to recharge him and retry him and go through the whole process. But every member of the school board on Loudoun County at the time of the rape is now off. They've either resigned or retired or been unseated.
Now that's changed. Good for you, Luke. Good for you, Luke. Spencer, you went on an exciting adventure. You went down to Texas and rented a helicopter. What happened? Tell me about this story.
Oh, that's right. One of my favorite parts of this job is that you get to go on adventures, and this really has been an incredible experience, an incredible ride. This story started in this very nice suburb in Houston, just outside of Houston. We're in this beautiful neighborhood, at this beautiful home, and this very kind man was going to take us up in a helicopter from his backyard. And we went about 30 miles over this community called Colony Ridge. And effectively what it is it is a development. It's larger than the size of Manhattan in terms of the square mileage. And it is specifically made to cater to illegal aliens. So it attracts illegal aliens in its marketing practices, in its financial strategies, in its lending, and it has created a community of an undetermined population. Some people think 100,000 people or more, the majority of which we believe are illegal aliens. And we're taking this helicopter from this beautiful, idyllic neighborhood. We look down, and just like that, it changes. And you look below, and it really is not recognizable as the United States of America. It looks like a third world shantytown, and it was in that moment, you sometimes have these kind of aha moments where you go, this is a story. This is a real story. And the rumors that I've heard about this place are almost certainly true.
Well, let's get into the nuts and bolts real quick before you go on. Did you just go down there and Google, like, how to rent a helicopter?
Thankfully, there's somebody who is sympathetic to us, who wanted to just take us in a helicopter
A reader.
ride. A reader, exactly, who's concerned about what was happening to his community, concerned about illegal immigration. Of course, this was during the Biden years, so he was feeling it most acutely there in Texas. And he took us in this helicopter ride, and we're looking out, and it kind of clicks that this is going to be a major story. And over the course of really the next year and a half, we uncovered a number of different stories on this place. We uncovered corruption between the developer and local politicians. We uncovered a relationship between the developer and a local politician who now was ousted from his seat after our stories were released. And most recently, it's culminated in a series of legal and political actions. We have a lawsuit against Colony Ridge from the Texas Attorney General, a lawsuit from the Department of Justice and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for predatory lending. And just a couple months ago, there was a massive deportation raid in Colony Ridge. There has been more than 120 illegal aliens captured in this community. That includes members of MS-13. That includes individuals who are wanted for murder. That includes drug traffickers from the CJNG, a prolific terrorist and cartel organization. And we're still seeing the ripples of these stories, but I expect more deportations and more legal matters to come.
So has Tom Homan given you a call to thank you yet? No. So let's move on to DEI. You have a fun story recently, Spencer, where the Intel services transed Old MacDonald.
Yeah, some of the best stories are the ones where you get the document, you get the tip, and you're really not sure what to believe. You don't know whether or not this is true. And that certainly is the case for a number of these stories we've had on the intelligence community. We had a story about a year and a half ago, and it was a 36-page document from the NSA. I'd had this document for a while, somebody sent it to me, and I really didn't believe that it was legitimate. I thought that it was maybe somebody trying to dupe me just because of how ridiculous it was. And it was a DEI glossary from the NSA, from the National Security Agency. And they have words like white fragility, transphobia, alternative pronouns like Z and Zer, completely made up terms, trans misogyny, all of these words that you would expect to hear maybe in a sociology class at Berkeley. You wouldn't expect to hear it from a place like the NSA. So we ended up confirming that this was a legitimate document. We published it. They kind of backpedaled to us in the statement, said that it wasn't an official it was shared in their server, but it wasn't an official document. But we found a wave of DEI and pro-trans materials from the intelligence agencies. We saw one story out of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence where they celebrated Pride Month by painting the nails of intelligence agents the colors of the transgender flag.
Oh my God.
We saw in the same event, it was like this fair that they had where people were crocheting the pride flag, crocheting the transgender flag. These are government agents who are tasked with upholding our national security, working during work hours, celebrating some of the most fringe ideologies. They had speakers who were brought in who were pushing these ideologies as well, completely and utterly detached from the priorities of the American people. And when we brought these stories out, it really reflected how far they had drifted from their actual mission.
And did you see any immediate change, or did they just continue to deny?
You know, they clamped up, I'd say, a bit. You know, we ended up getting another story out of it, thankfully. But, you know, the intelligence community is notoriously rather discreet, or at least they attempt to be. We did end up getting another document. It was a DEI glossary, or a DEI newsletter that went out every month, where, and this is another one of those instances where I could hardly believe that it was real. There is a man claiming that cross-dressing made him a better intelligence officer. So we broke these stories, and I believe that a lot of these agendas and ideologies have been excised since the administration has shifted as of January.
Yeah, I think Gabbard showed up and nuked them all, right? Luke, you did a series of stories last year on plagiarism that I think these kids would love to hear about. Among some of the most elite people that you caught, Jamal Bowman, who is now a former disgraced congressman. We were talking backstage about how simple these stories are to do. Maybe you could walk us through it.
Yeah, and it's funny because I worked with Chris Rufo, who I'm a huge fan of, on these plagiarism stories. And Rufo just came out with another story on Jamal Bowman, now doing some other scam with a school in New York. And, you know, I think that the impetus of it is when somebody does something dumb or bad, it's probably not the first time. It might be the first time they've been caught, but you look through the history, you're probably going to see a pattern. And so when you see somebody do something dumb in public life or something unethical, we could go back and look at their academic histories. And so we got the head of DEI at UCLA, her entire dissertation, where she got her PhD on, it was the only paper she's ever published, was almost entirely copied and pasted. It was completely discrediting. If the PhD meant anything, it would have been revoked. UCLA is still employing her. And so they did this settlement with the Trump administration, but, you know, the DEI thing is a true threat to the value of academia, because your degree means nothing if you will give a degree to people like that. And then we did Daryl Pines, who's the president of the University of Maryland. He did this paper on rocket science, but it turned out that he stole a third of it verbatim from a kid in Australia. He copied and pasted it from his tutorial on rocket science website.
How did you get tipped to this again? Was it an email or
It wasn't a tip. What happened is he was doing crazy stuff about anti-Semitism on campus, and he had copied from ChatGPT he was trying to stick it to the Jews by passing off faculty scholarship about Palestine. And I could tell right away it was actually from ChatGPT. And so I confirmed it was from ChatGPT, and at that point I said, all right, this guy has one instance of academic dishonesty under his belt. Let's go back and look at his papers. And so I ran it through a computer program, and the funny thing here is because he had stolen from a kid in Australia, they used British spellings over there. And so I know that this could not have been an accident where you copy somebody else's notes and you forget to put quotation marks around them. He knew that it was somebody else's language. He must have, because he changed all those OU when, you know, Britain used the British spellings. He changed them to American spellings.
Let's talk a bit about the stakes in investigative reporting. A lot of these, you know, you got to get lawyers involved. It's long investigations. You have to be 100% correct. So there's a lot of moving parts. What are some of the challenges, and this is for both of you, what are some of the challenges you face getting a piece of work over the line and published?
You know, I'd say the stakes really, it depends on the story, but I've heard before that a real good piece of investigative journalism is a piece that somebody out there doesn't want you to publish. If everybody wants you to publish it, if it's not going to somehow materially impact the world, then it might not actually be a piece of investigative journalism to begin with. So that means that you really have to think very deeply about the material that you're publishing, because it is going to have potentially adverse impacts on people's careers or on various different companies, programs, policies, agencies, whatever the subject of the story might be. But this is something that I think is so freeing about being a journalist. everybody here knows that the left has had cultural hegemony over so many of our institutions, whether it's entertainment, whether it's the financial world, whether it's much of our politics. And you actually have a chance to fight back and push back against that as a journalist. And every single institution that has been captured by the left, every single one of those presents you an opportunity as a journalist to push back and to make a name for yourself. There's been DEI or these far-left agendas being pushed places that many people wouldn't expect. Right after starting at the Daily Wire, I had a story on DEI at NASCAR, of all places. And NASCAR was discriminating against white applicants in an internship program. They were openly being anti-white and saying that whites need not apply for this program. We wrote a story on it, and thankfully about a week later, we could write a follow-up story, which was that they had canceled that program. So you can really notch up legitimate, real wins, and every time you see or hear that the left has complete cultural dominance, it has control over institutions, if you are somebody who's interested in journalism and investigative reporting, you should see every single one of those institutions, every single one of those programs that you object to as an opportunity for you to push back against it, to push back against their cultural control, and to really materially impact the world.
Speaking of adverse career reactions, my favorite Luke story is that he got the same government bureaucrat fired from 2 different jobs. And I love this story because I just picture this guy going into HR. They're like, hey, Gerald, you got to go to HR. He goes in and they're like, have you heard of a guy named Luke Rosiak? And he's just like, ugh, got me again. What's the most gonzo stuff you've done in pursuit of investigative journalism?
I love that story. And, there's been so many people that have kind of lost their job that I literally forgot about that story until you said it. But look, it's really fun to be a journalist. If any of you guys are considering this line of work, I highly encourage it. It's awesome. You do stuff like go through people's trash at 3 a.m. I've done car chases. So I remember, one time I was grabbing somebody's trash in the middle of the night and I saw some stirring inside the house. I kind of freaked out and threw the bag into my car. Well, it bursts open and it turns out there's some rotten meat in there. And there's maggots on the meat. They're crawling around in my car. And I have to put the most disgusting puzzle ever. There's financial documents in the trash, just as I anticipated and hoped for. But they're ripped up and they're mixed in with maggots. So I've got to put together the most disgusting puzzle ever assembled. It's why I did a car chase where there's something called residency fraud in the DC public schools where people from Maryland take the education from DC public schools, which sounds like a weird thing to steal because they're horrible schools, but they do it because it's convenient to their work and because they have free aftercare.
First of all, Luke did this story when I was his editor, and he pitched it as I'm going to sit outside of schools and watch little kids go into the school. And we're all like, Luke, dude, you got to take a woman with you, please. So we made you take Catherine with you.
Yeah, that was super helpful, and I never would have thought of that. That's the kind of wisdom that editors bring. And it kept me out of jail. Thank you, Jeff. So first I started with writing down the license plates, and I got like 31% of the license plates picking kids up at the school in DC had Maryland tags. But the left started attacking me and saying, well, you don't know, maybe everybody just rented a car from Maryland that day, but they actually live in DC. They're making all the excuses. So I doubled down and said, all right, I'm gonna start following these people back to Maryland because we all know the cars with Maryland tags live in Maryland. And so I started following them there. But when you're following a car, you want to keep a couple car lengths back so they don't see you. And the problem is you got to run red lights if the light changes in between them and you, because if they get out of sight, you've lost them. And at one point, I'm like 10 miles outside of DC following this lady with her 3 kids from DC public schools. She goes through the KFC drive-through line. So I've got to get in the drive-through line behind her. And now I'm not 3 car lengths behind, I'm like 2 inches behind her. And then I had to order chicken, which I didn't even want because I'm in the drive-through. So you have a lot of fun with this job. Every day is something new. And you get impact. You get people fired, you get you get, I did a story years ago about this government agency where their IT agency where they're making robots to lecture you for using politically incorrect language. So if you're on Slack and you're telling your coworkers, like, hey guys, we got a meeting later, this cartoon will pop up and say, did you mean to say people? Because guys is sexist. At one point they were jeopardizing the security of Americans because they were supposed to use facial recognition for these super secure accounts. But they said that's racist to look at people's skin color, so we're just going to leave the accounts unsecured. And then they lied about it. They also had a policy where when you go into a meeting with your colleagues, you have to announce your race. And the reason for that is because if there were any blind people in the meeting, the blind people need to know whether they should be offended by a lack of racial diversity. So I wrote wrote about this thing years ago, and then Elon Musk comes in, sees I tweet my story, he retweets me, and he abolishes the agency, and they're all fired. So sometimes it takes a while, justice, but revenge is best served cold. Sometimes you do this work and you don't see the impact later, and then years down the line, it pays off.
I love that, Luke. We were talking a bit backstage about campus activism and getting results and all this stuff, and I'm wondering if you guys, we were saying that if you bring facts with you, you can achieve a policy end. And not just facts like Ben Shapiro facts, like facts that people didn't know previously. So what's some advice that you can give the campus activists here about what investigative tools they can use, like we mentioned the plagiarism tool, to sort of out or oust problematic professors, administrators, and so on and so forth on these university campuses? FOIA is a good one. You can FOIA not just emails, but you can try text messages. Sometimes people are looser when they're texting. Plagiarism, I had my own complicated way of finding plagiarism, but you guys, if you're on college campuses, oftentimes you'll have a license to one of these professional tools. If you can find a professor or a grad student who will hook you up with it, you look up all the professor's stuff. You can also look into the foreign influence on your college. You have things like the Confucius Institutes from China. You also have these crazy people who are coming from Muslim countries and then agitating using CARE and things like that for anti-Semitism on campus. Where are they coming from? Who's sending them here? Is there a foreign government involved, foreign groups bankrolling it? You can look into the scientific grant funding to your university from the federal government using websites like grants.gov or NIH Reporter. You can look into nonprofits that are causing problems on your campus by using tools like the Nonprofit Explorer from ProPublica, which relies on IRS Form 990s, a good way to follow the money there. And another thing to do is unions. Unions are huge, whether you're looking at the federal government or college campuses, because now, oddly enough, the United Auto Workers is, I think, something like half their members, or at least most of their recent growth, has come from unionizing PhDs. And so you guys have oftentimes the UAW on campus, and they've now gone from being like a blue-collar union that represents sane people to being a completely far-left agitator group that does things like anti-Semitism. And you can look at the Department of Labor forms called LM2s for that. Spencer, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd say one of the most important things about campus activism is just finding other like-minded people, and of course, that's why you're here with YAF, but you can also build up parallel institutions on your campus. I went to Pepperdine University. It's a great place that I think very highly of, and our paper at the time was very left-wing. Still one of the most heavily edited stories that I've ever written was for our campus newspaper, right in the BLM era. But we had a different campus newspaper that rose up and had a little bit more of a conservative leaning bent. And that was just a great counterbalance. It added a lot of diversity of thought on the campus. And there are so many ways, so many organizations, whether it's YAF or various different groups around the country, that really do want to help you out on campus, whether that's starting a chapter of a student organization, whether that's starting a newspaper. There's various organizations that will help you out with that on campus, and you can build up that infrastructure and begin to rebalance the campus.
So I guess I have time for about one more. You guys, imagine yourselves as campus activists. You want to become investigative reporters. You're at a major university, SEC, maybe Big Ten or something like that. Where is the first place you look for corruption, graft? What do you think?
When it comes to campus itself, I think there's always going to be student life fees, right? And sometimes those student life fees go to actually legitimate uses, right? Other times, they've been siphoned off for left-wing causes. So that's something that a lot of institutions are very, very transparent about. That's probably the first place that I would go to look.
Luke?
Obviously, where does tuition go? Tuition keeps increasing every year, and no one can explain why. I personally asked Chuck Schumer about this 18 years ago, and he couldn't tell me. They're just like, personnel costs are most of it. Personnel costs are the largest cost at every business.
Right.
It doesn't answer the question at all.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the great questions. That's like this common sense thing that everybody kind of knows. College tuition is going up constantly. And if you can figure that out, and it should be possible, you just follow the breadcrumbs and request financial documents and be persistent, I think that would be a great service that you do to your individual college. And it also, it gives you some credibility and authority because it's not transparently partisan or partisan at all, and it shouldn't be. You're making this case that on its face is just this reasonable thing that everybody should care about. And if the takeaway people get is academics are horrible and they're hypocrites, then great, but that's just a side effect.
Okay, I think we're going to move on to Q&A.
Just a reminder, please state your name, your school, and one brief question.
Hi, my name is Asen. I go to UT Austin, Hook'em Horns. My question is, you've spoken about how extreme some DEI policies have become. How would you advise students at majority liberal schools to effectively explain their concerns, especially when many of their peers genuinely believe and support these policies?
I'd say when it comes to trying to overturn these policies, there are various different conservative organizations that might actually be able to help out on the legal level if there's legitimate discrimination going on, and in so many cases with DEI there is. When it comes to making the case, almost everybody, at least people who are on the right or even more centrist, almost everybody will profess a belief in non-discrimination. And if you can show that there is a gap between what we've said that we stood for as a nation and these policies, and you can show that gap, I think it's very easy to do that given just how flagrant a lot of these policies are. And again, many of them really are actually illegal in the literal sense. So that is a great point of leverage to use if you're trying to overturn policies on campus.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Louise, and I'm from Sweden. I study dentistry at Karolinska University, and my question is about transgender. So in Sweden, we have a lot of problem with the woke movement. Recently, a new law has been implied that at 16 years old, you can change your gender. And for me, I'm struggling a lot with this, since I can see that a lot of the females are very pro on this. And I was just going to ask you guys for some advice. How can I speak to females about this?
Talk to women. Which one of you is best at talking to women?
Not the best panelist for that. I thought we had Greta Thunberg in here ready to throw tomatoes at us, so I'm just glad you're friendly.
Sorry, guys, perhaps just in general, but yeah.
You got something, Spencer?
Yeah,
okay.
I would say that really at its core, transgenderism, it's a revolt against nature. That's fundamentally what it is. And if somebody has the proper self-esteem, the proper understanding of who they are as a person and their identity, that's not an ideology that's going to be attractive. I would say that when you're speaking to your peers on this issue, encourage them to love their actual self and their actual personhood. You don't become yourself by trying to irreparably damage your body and your personality and who you are on a fundamental level. So I would say really preach that aspect of loving yourself for who you actually legitimately are, not trying to revolt against who you are in your own nature.
I think to follow up on that, I think sort of highlighting children helps quite a bit, especially with women. This is happening to kids. Oftentimes it's irreversible. And there are examples that you can point out. So maybe appeal to motherhood in some ways.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Abigail Nichols. I'm actually an intern with the National Journalism Center this summer. My question for you guys is, how do you handle any sort of form of just writer's block whenever you're working on a story?
I know I could answer that, but you guys are the panelists.
I would say get up, move around, get away from your desk. Go take a walk. I know it sounds simple, but I do laps around the office all day. I get up and I sit in 18 different places around the office. If I sit down and I just try and write, oftentimes that's when that writer's block hits. Get some fresh air. Maybe a little caffeine can help too. But I'd say get up, get moving. Your mind's going to be a lot more active, and that's probably the quickest fix to writer's block. And
talk to people. Sometimes going out to lunch, you go out for a long lunch, and it seems like you're slacking off from work, but that can actually be the most important thing you do all day because you're hearing new ideas, and it gets the juices flowing.
Yeah, chopping it up with people, I think, definitely helps. And then some of my best angles came like 3 miles into a 6-mile run. So definitely good advice there.
Do you recommend smoking cigarettes?
I'm not sure if I can recommend smoking cigarettes.
Thank you guys, appreciate it.
Congrats on NJC.
Hyatt, I am from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Go Vols. I'm wondering, how do we stop and reverse the widespread lack of reporting and mishandling of serious and often criminal incidents at schools?
Luke, did you want to kind of take that up?
So I'm not sure I understand. I wasn't aware that was occurring. Can you provide more context?
There's a couple of podcasts I follow, and recently one of the big scandals that they've been talking about is with the Buffalo public school system, and there has been a serious underreporting.
Oh, you're talking about K through 12 schools. Yeah. I thought you were talking about colleges. Yeah, so, I mean, look, they rigged the stats, and so they're putting kids in harm's way in a way that is abhorrent. And going back to Obama, they did this thing where the stats have to be equal among all the races for discipline. And so like in LA, at one point, they originally were suspending like 75,000 kids a year. It went down to like 5,000 kids the next year. And it wasn't because all the kids had started behaving. It was because the stats weren't going to be racially balanced. And so in effect, what was happening was kids of certain races were being allowed to viciously pummel and brutalize kids of other races so that the spreadsheet would look good and the principal wouldn't get fired. And I think the first thing you do is call attention to that and you personalize it. And it kind of like what Jeff mentioned about taking the same reason you want to talk about women as mothers, you want to make people feel when something hits home, it hits a lot differently. And that's one of the things you saw with the Loudon rape stories. Any number of people were talking about transgender ideology and how they oppose it, but we can say, look, there was a second girl that was raped because they covered it up and lied about it when a transgender person raped the first girl, and I can prove it. Suddenly that's when you start changing hearts and minds. So I think personalizing it, telling the story, and if necessary, first digging up those facts originally, because these are innocent children, and it's just basically communism to try to get equal outcomes, and it always comes from actually bringing certain people down rather than bringing anybody up.
Thank you very much.
Hello. First of all, thank you very much for being here. Your stories are very entertaining. Love you guys. My name is Arseny Kamenko. I'm from Penn State. I wanted to ask you, what are some resources you would use or would generally recommend to keep tabs on organizations that make sort of controversial or unfamiliar moves? Like we have Palantir with AI and other companies like ChatGPT with recently their sort of selling talks and things of that nature.
So this Capital Research Center runs a great tool. It's kind of like a Wikipedia for activist groups. The other thing is the Form 990s I mentioned through ProPublica. And then, this is a little bit off topic, but I want to make sure I get to it. Other resources for more in general reporting. I highly encourage people to read Inspector General reports and the General Accountability Office reports. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that's a little bit wonky. It's a little bit inside Washington, but you can learn a lot about all the interest groups and all the spending and everything else going on in DC from these kind of resources. And when you look at Doge coming in and things like that, there was some criticism that maybe they don't know enough. And I don't really agree with that because they're actually fast learners, but you do have to have the desire to learn. We can't write it all off as the swamp and we don't need to know about it. We do need to know about it. If you want to attack it, you have to understand how it works. There's an expression like snakes hide in the grass. So that means you've got to get down in the weeds, because when you're doing battle with these bureaucrats, they will use the pedantic little distinctions in their alphabet soup of acronyms to trick you and manipulate you. And if you understand all the things too, you can figure out when they're lying to you. So I think this is something that we've got to do as journalists, is be willing to do the hard work and get in the weeds, and not just say we don't like the deep state and we want to get rid of it, but to understand it as a means of getting it under control.
When it comes to Palantir specifically, since they have, I was a national security reporter for a long time before I became an editor, they have contracts with the government and they have routine communications with the government, and that overlap is often public. So you can FOIA it, you can look at their contracts, whatever contracts they've gotten, and that could be a good start, a kind of a string to start pulling, like who's involved in the contracting practice. It all starts with a very simple question: who's involved, how much money is involved, when did it happen, who decided. So that's a good way for major companies like Palantir that have government contracts.
Yeah, and when you're looking at contracts, I mean, usaspending.gov, amazing website, briefly blew up in the Doge era, but it's been around for 10 years. Nobody ever looked at it. And then suddenly people were like, oh my gosh, you can find all this crazy. This has always been there. Why haven't we been always doing this thing?
Yeah.
But you can get, information about contracts from there, and you can trace it back to a tool called sam.gov, which is where they originally are soliciting for the contracts. You can look into procurement disputes with the GAO. But yeah, there's all kinds of interesting things with contracts, with set-aside provisions and, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts where they basically can get an unlimited amount of money. There's crazy stuff, and then you can FOIA the contract. Some of it's protected under FOIA, but contracting is a very important area that I think deserves a lot of scrutiny.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Raider Myrie. I'm a student at the University of Alabama, Roll Tide. And firstly, thank you guys for coming, especially you, Spencer. I believe we had a brief conversation on X, so that was great to hear from you. On my campus, despite being a very conservative campus for public school, we really have only one student-run publication for news and for opinions and other sort of pieces like that. And despite claiming to be a very fair, non-partisan publication, just like the mainstream media, that's not really the truth. They have a very liberal tilt. So I'm wondering, as a conservative who wants to be able to show the students and the public these issues from a conservative point of view on campus, what are some strategies that I can take to be able to accomplish this, especially when presented with the system how it is?
There's really a great infrastructure for taking on the left on campus from a journalistic perspective on the right. There's a host of different organizations that are dedicated specifically to reporting on campus issues: College Fix, Campus Reform, a whole slate of different groups. And there's also some organizations that I know will assist you in setting up your own on-campus publication. So at my campus at Pepperdine, there is an organization, a new outlet that got created on campus with some support from some conservative organizations. I know that one that helps to that end is the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, ISI. But I know that there's really any organization that supports conservatives on campus would certainly be interested in helping you establish some form of outlet to counterbalance what you're seeing currently on campus.
And you actually, we're in the age of self-publishing as well. You started off on YouTube, there's Substack, there's all kinds of opportunities out there.
Thank you so much.
Unfortunately, that was all of the time we had left for questions. Thank you all very much for your time.
Yeah.